Number 1. Aaron Hernandez, the tight end who turned killer. He had the talent. He had the spotlight. And for a while, it seemed like Aaron Hernandez had everything. A rising NFL star with a multi-million-dollar contract and a Super Bowl on the horizon, he was supposed to be the next big name in football. But behind his explosive plays on the field was a life tangled in darkness, violence, and secrets. His fall wasn't just a tragedy for the league, it was a haunting reminder of how fame can't erase the past, and how some demons, if left unchecked, will always return. Born in Bristol, Connecticut, in 1989, Aaron Joseph Hernandez grew up in a working-class family with strong ties to both football and discipline. His father, Dennis Hernandez, was a respected figure in the community, a former athlete himself, and he ran the household like a tight ship. But when Dennis died suddenly during a routine surgery, Aaron was just 16. The loss devastated him. Friends would later say something changed in Aaron that year. Whatever direction and grounding he had seemed to vanish. And in its place, something colder, harder, began to take root. He went on to play college football at the University of Florida under coach Urban Meyer, where he showed enormous promise. But even then, rumors began to surface. Hernandez was involved in multiple off-field incidents, including a bar fight and a possible shooting, but few led to formal charges. He managed to slide under the radar, protected by the shield of his athletic potential. Coaches, agents, and scouts alike knew about his temper and troubling associations, but the NFL has always had a long history of looking the other way when talent is involved. In 2010, Hernandez was drafted by the New England Patriots. Despite red flags, Bill Belichick and the Patriots organization took a chance on him, selecting him in the 4th round. It was seen as a gamble, and at first, it looked like it had paid off. He and Rob Gronkowski became a dominant tight end duo, redefining the position and terrorizing defenses across the league. In 2012, the Patriots signed him to a 5-year, $40 million contract. At just 22, Hernandez was one of the youngest and highest-paid tight ends in NFL history. But while his star was rising in the stadiums, his life off the field was unraveling fast. Aaron had never fully severed ties with the streets or the people from them. Back in Connecticut, and in parts of Massachusetts, he was still linked to old friends with dangerous reputations. There were whispered connections to drugs, firearms, and even gang activity. Those closest to him often spoke of his paranoia, how he would always look over his shoulder, install multiple security cameras, and carry a gun at all times. For all his wealth and fame, he never felt safe. And maybe, in some way, he never truly was. The tipping point came in the summer of 2013. On June 17th, the body of Odin Lloyd, a semi-pro football player and boyfriend of Hernandez's fiancée's sister, was found in an industrial park, riddled with bullets. Within days, suspicion turned toward Aaron Hernandez. Surveillance footage from his own home showed him holding a gun, pacing nervously, just hours after the murder. Tire tracks, text messages, and witness statements began to piece together a chilling narrative. On June 26th, just 9 days after Lloyd's body was found, Aaron Hernandez was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The Patriots released him within 90 minutes of his arrest. Just like that, one of the NFL's brightest young stars became its darkest scandal. The trial was a media circus. Prosecutors painted Hernandez as a cold-blooded killer who murdered Lloyd over a perceived slight. A few words exchanged at a nightclub that had somehow bruised his pride. The defense argued there was no clear motive, and that the evidence was circumstantial. But in April 2015, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hernandez, once a household name on Sundays, was now inmate W106228 at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Massachusetts. But the story didn't end there. While serving his life sentence, Hernandez was also tried for a double homicide that occurred in 2012 outside a Boston nightclub. He was accused of shooting two men over a spilled drink. In a surprising twist, he was acquitted of those charges in 2017. It looked like a legal turning point, perhaps even the beginning of an appeal process for the Lloyd conviction. But just 5 days after his acquittal, the story took its most shocking turn. On April 19, 2017, Aaron Hernandez was found hanging from a bedsheet in his prison cell. He had jammed the door shut with cardboard and smeared drawings and messages on the walls in blood and ink. Among them was the phrase, "John 3 verse 16, a reference to a Bible verse, and several references to Illuminati symbols. He was just 27 years old. The suicide stunned the world. Many couldn't believe it. Others felt it was the inevitable conclusion of a man who had been spiraling for years. But what followed was even more disturbing. An autopsy revealed that Aaron Hernandez had severe CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a brain disease linked to repeated head trauma, common in football players. In fact, his brain showed the worst case of CTE ever seen in someone that young. Doctors speculated that the disease may have contributed to his violent behavior, paranoia, and impulsivity. Suddenly, the question wasn't just why did Hernandez kill Odin Lloyd. It became how much of him was already broken long before. His death left behind more than just questions. It left a daughter who would grow up without a father, families grieving, and a league forced to look in the mirror, not just about CTE, but about the kind of people it glorifies and the systems it protects. Aaron Hernandez's story is not just one of crime, it's one of collapse. A young man who had every reason to win, but couldn't outrun what was buried inside him. The fame, the money, the fans, none of it saved him. And in the end, all that remained was a legacy wrapped in talent, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Number 2. Ray Carruth, a murder for hire that stunned the nation. He was supposed to be a star. Ray Carruth, a first-round NFL draft pick, had the moves, the speed, and the spotlight. As a wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, his future seemed written in gold. But behind the crisp routes and polished interviews, Carruth harbored a darker truth, a fear, a selfishness, and a rage that would turn him from a promising athlete into one of the most infamous criminals in NFL history. His story isn't just about murder, it's about control, cowardice, and a child who had survived the very crime meant to erase him. Born Ray Lamar Wiggins in Sacramento, California, in 1974, Carruth grew up athletic, gifted, and deeply ambitious. He earned a scholarship to the University of Colorado, where his talent on the field quickly drew attention. In 1997, he was drafted by the Carolina Panthers as the 27th overall pick, a significant investment by the team. At just 5 feet 11 inches, he wasn't the most physically intimidating player, but he was fast, focused, and effective. In his rookie year, he caught 44 passes and 4 touchdowns. Analysts were impressed. This wasn't just another draft pick, this was someone to watch. But something was off. Even during his college years, Carruth was described as withdrawn and controlling in personal relationships. He had a son from a previous relationship but refused to pay child support, claiming the financial burden could damage his career. It was a telling sign, one that would foreshadow something far darker. In 1999, Carruth began dating Cherika Adams, a 24-year-old real estate agent and aspiring model from Charlotte, North Carolina. Their relationship was casual, but when Cherika became pregnant, Carruth's demeanor changed. He didn't want the child. He didn't want the responsibility. And, according to prosecutors, he didn't want to be tied financially or emotionally to a woman he wasn't serious about. He allegedly pressured her to have an abortion, but she refused. That's when Carruth made a choice, one that would destroy multiple lives. On the night of November 16, 1999, Cherika Adams had gone to the movies with Carruth. She followed him home in her car. But as they drove down a quiet Charlotte street, Carruth slowed his vehicle, and then suddenly sped away. At that moment, a car pulled up beside Cherika. Inside was a man named Van Brett Watkins, a nightclub manager and known criminal. He pulled out a gun and fired 5 shots into Cherika's car. 4 of them struck her. Bleeding and panicked, Cherika somehow managed to dial 911. Her call, gasping and fragmented, would become the most chilling evidence in the case. She named Carruth. She explained what happened. She begged for help. "He just left," she told the dispatcher. "He slowed down, and then they came up and shot me." Her words were like a dagger, an accusation delivered as her life slipped away. Cherika was rushed to the hospital, and though doctors managed to save her baby through emergency C-section, her own condition worsened. She fell into a coma and never woke up. 28 days later, she died from her injuries. Her final words, recorded in that 911 call and a later written statement, became the voice of justice. Carruth, meanwhile, ran. He was initially arrested the day after the shooting, but was released on a $3 million bond. As soon as Cherika died, the charge escalated to first-degree murder, and Carruth vanished. A manhunt followed. For weeks, he was nowhere to be found, until November 24, 1999, when he was discovered hiding in the trunk of a car in Tennessee. With him were cash, bottles of his own urine, candy bars, and a cell phone. It was a coward's escape, one that only deepened public disgust. In 2001, Carruth stood trial for conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. Then Brett Watkins, the triggerman, testified against him, saying Carruth orchestrated the attack and promised him money in return. Watkins himself was sentenced to at least 40 years in prison. The prosecution argued that Carruth had arranged the murder to avoid paying child support and to free himself from the responsibility of fatherhood. The defense, meanwhile, claimed Carruth had panicked but was not involved in the planning. The jury believed most of what they heard from the prosecution, but not all of it. In a decision that shocked many, Carruth was acquitted of first-degree murder but found guilty of conspiracy and related charges. He was sentenced to 18 years and 11 months in prison. But the most powerful part of this story was not Ray Carruth. It was the child who survived. Chancellor Lee Adams, the baby saved from his mother's womb, was born with severe cerebral palsy due to oxygen deprivation from the shooting. Doctors weren't sure he'd survive. But he did. Raised by his maternal grandmother, Sandra Adams, Chancellor grew up with a radiant smile, despite the trauma that shaped his life before it even began. Over the years, Sandra became a public figure, not in anger, but in forgiveness. She advocated for children of incarcerated parents and for disability rights. She said she wanted her grandson to know love, not hatred. As for Carruth, he served nearly 2 decades behind bars and was released from prison on October 22, 2018. In a surprising and controversial open letter written a few months before his release, he apologized, not to the public, but to Sandra Adams and his son. He expressed regret and claimed he wanted a role in Chancellor's life. Sandra, ever gracious, forgave him, but made it clear he would not be welcome in her grandson's daily life. "He will always know who his father is," she said, "but that doesn't mean he needs him." The legacy of Ray Carruth is one of wasted potential. Not just the destruction of a promising career, but the destruction of a woman's life, a child's future, and a family's peace. His choices created pain that rippled far beyond the football field, into hospital rooms, courtrooms, and every day of a little boy's life. What makes Carruth's case so haunting is how deliberate it was. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. It was planned, cold, calculated, and carried out by a man who once had everything, and feared losing even a fraction of it more than he feared taking a life. Today, when people speak of Ray Carruth, it's not as a football player, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when ego overrides empathy, when reputation matters more than responsibility. His story isn't just about murder, it's about the emptiness that fame can't fill. Number 3. Robert Rozier, from NFL to a cult's hitman. He was a man who seemed to have escaped the chaos, a second chance, a ticket to something better. Robert Rozier had the speed, the build, and the opportunity. After playing college ball for the University of California, he made it all the way to the NFL, donning the jersey of the St. Louis Cardinals. But if football offered him a new beginning, Rozier never truly let go of the darkness he carried with him. What came next wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a descent into madness, murder, and a twisted cult that turned faith into bloodshed. Born in 1955 in Anchorage, Alaska, Rozier grew up moving frequently due to his father's military career. He was a gifted athlete from a young age, fast, agile, and aggressive on the field. At the University of California, Berkeley, he showed flashes of brilliance as a defensive lineman. And in 1979, his NFL dream came true when the St. Louis Cardinals signed him as a defensive end. But his time in the league was brief and troubled. Rozier struggled with discipline, and after just 6 games, he was cut from the team. For many, that would have been the end of the story. A failed career, a name lost in the shuffle. But for Rozier, it was only the beginning. What happened next is almost too surreal to believe. After drifting through Canada's CFL and briefly trying out for other teams, Rozier's life took a strange and dangerous turn. By the early 1980s, he was living in Florida, adrift and searching for something to give his life purpose. That's when he found the Nation of Yahweh, a religious cult led by a charismatic and mysterious figure named Yahweh ben Yahweh. Preaching a mix of black Hebrew Israelite ideology, self-discipline, and racial superiority, Yahweh ben Yahweh built a massive following across Miami and beyond. Outwardly, the group ran successful businesses and conducted community outreach. Inwardly, it was something far more sinister. Rozier quickly rose through the ranks of the cult. To the outside world, he was reborn, given a new name, Brother Elohim, and welcomed into the inner circle. But the deeper he went, the more violent the group became. Yahweh ben Yahweh demanded total loyalty, not just in faith, but in blood. Members were expected to prove their devotion through acts of violence. And Rozier obeyed. By the mid-1980s, Robert Rozier had become one of the cult's most feared enforcers. He was tasked with eliminating traitors, former members or critics of Yahweh ben Yahweh's teachings. What followed was a series of cold-blooded killings, carried out in motels, alleyways, and quiet neighborhoods. Rozier would later confess to at least 7 murders, all committed in the name of the cult. The victims weren't random. They were marked. Some had simply questioned the leader. Others had tried to leave. None were spared. Rozier would later describe how he and other cult members believed they were doing God's work, purging the unfaithful, cleansing the community, preparing for a new world order. But these weren't holy acts. They were executions. The truth eventually began to unravel. In 1986, Rozier was arrested in Florida for passing bad checks. But when investigators looked closer, they discovered something far more horrifying: his connection to a string of unsolved murders. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the promise of the death penalty, Rozier made a deal. He agreed to become a key informant in the federal case against Yahweh bin Yahweh and his organization. His testimony would be the nail in the coffin for one of the most dangerous cults in American history. Thanks in large part to Rozier's cooperation, Yahweh bin Yahweh and several of his top lieutenants were indicted in 1990 on charges of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial was explosive. Rozier testified in graphic detail about the killings, the orders he received, and the mind control that permeated the cult. His words were chilling, not just for what he did, but for how matter-of-factly he described it. In 1992, Yahweh bin Yahweh was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. The cult collapsed. Its leader was silenced. Rozier, meanwhile, was given a light sentence, just over 10 years, in exchange for his testimony. When he was released, he entered the Witness Protection Program, with a new name and a new life. Most people assumed he'd vanish forever, a ghost kept alive only in court records and cult documentaries. But Robert Rozier wasn't done. In 1999, just a few years after his release, Rozier was arrested again, this time in California, for writing bad checks. A seemingly small offense. But under California's 3 strikes law, even minor crimes can lead to major consequences if the offender has a serious past. And Rozier's past was anything but minor. Because of his previous murder convictions, the state of California threw the book at him. He was convicted of fraud, but sentenced to 25 years to life. This time, there was no deal. No cooperation. No escape. As of today, Robert Rozier is still in prison, serving a life sentence in California. The man who once stood on the edge of football glory, who once wore the uniform of an NFL team, will likely die behind bars, not for the 7 murders he committed, but for the lies and fraud that followed them. His story is one of the most bizarre and disturbing in the history of sports. How does a man go from the NFL to becoming a hitman for a religious cult? What was he searching for? Purpose, belonging, power? And how did no one stop him sooner? Robert Rozier's legacy is not one of athletic greatness. It is a cautionary tale about manipulation, blind loyalty, and the terrifying places a person can go when they lose all sense of morality. His victims were not nameless. They were mothers, sons, neighbors, people whose lives were taken in the name of something twisted and false. Even today, Rozier's name surfaces in discussions about cult violence, brainwashing, and the failures of the justice system. A man who should have had everything, talent, opportunity, and freedom, chose instead to become an agent of death. Not once. Not in a moment of rage. But over and over again for years. And when finally given a second chance, he wasted it. Just like the first. Number 4. Darren Sharper, Super Bowl champion turned serial predator. He was a fan favorite, the kind of player parents pointed to as a role model. Darren Sharper had it all, a winning smile, intelligence, charisma, and a career that spanned over a decade in the National Football League. As a 5-time Pro Bowler and Super Bowl champion, he wasn't just respected, he was admired. But behind the bright lights and polished interviews hid a predator. One who used fame not just to open doors, but to slip past suspicion. And when the truth emerged, it didn't just shock fans. It shattered the illusion of who Darren Sharper really was. Born in 1975 in Richmond, Virginia, Darren Mallory Sharper was athletic from an early age. He played football at the College of William and Mary, where he was both a star athlete and a scholar, a combination that turned heads during the 1997 NFL Draft. The Green Bay Packers selected him in the 2nd round, and his impact was immediate. Sharper quickly gained a reputation as one of the smartest and most dangerous safeties in the league. He would go on to play for the Minnesota Vikings and later the New Orleans Saints. Across his 14-season career, Sharper racked up over 60 interceptions, placing him among the top safeties of his era. He was known for reading offenses with uncanny precision, for turning defense into offense, and for his calm, confident leadership on the field. In 2010, he achieved what most players only dream of, winning the Super Bowl with the Saints. Off the field, Sharper parlayed his fame into a post-football media career. He worked as an analyst for NFL Network, regularly appearing on camera and offering expert insights. He was charming, well-spoken, and widely respected. But even as he stood under the studio lights, cracks in the image had already begun to form. The first accusation surfaced quietly. In 2013, a woman came forward in Los Angeles, claiming Sharper had drugged and raped her. At first, it seemed isolated, an unthinkable allegation against a man who had built a career on discipline and respect. But then, other women came forward. And then more. And as investigators compared timelines, the pattern became undeniable. According to police and prosecutors, Darren Sharper had been engaging in a horrific string of crimes that spanned multiple states, including California, Louisiana, Arizona, and Nevada. The method was disturbingly consistent. Sharper would meet women, often at bars or parties, charm them, offer them drinks, and then, after they were incapacitated, assault them. Toxicology reports later confirmed the presence of zolpidem, the active ingredient in Ambien, and other sedatives in several victims' systems. He didn't just rape these women. He drugged them to ensure they couldn't fight back. What made the case even more chilling was the level of coordination and planning. In some instances, Sharper wasn't acting alone. He was aided by associates, including a former sheriff's deputy, who helped him scout victims and carry out the assaults. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a system, a calculated series of crimes that destroyed lives in silence. As the scope of his actions became public, the fallout was immediate and intense. In February 2014, Sharper was arrested in Los Angeles. But this wasn't just a local matter. It became a federal case involving multiple jurisdictions. One by one, charges were filed across several states. Investigators described Sharper as a serial predator, a man who weaponized trust, celebrity, and access to victimize women who thought they were safe. The public response was swift. NFL fans, teammates, and former coaches were stunned. How could someone who stood on the biggest stages of American sports, who wore the jersey with pride and poise, be capable of such brutality? This wasn't just a fall from grace. It was betrayal. Sharper wasn't just another player. He had been a role model. And now, he was revealed to be a monster hiding in plain sight. In 2016, Sharper accepted a plea deal, one that covered charges from 4 states. As part of the agreement, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts of rape and sexual assault and admitted to drugging his victims. Initially, the plea deal was widely criticized, with some believing it was too lenient given the severity of the crimes. But the final sentence reflected the scale of his guilt. Darren Sharper was sentenced to nearly 20 years in federal prison. His projected release date is sometime in the early 2030s, though many believe he will serve the full sentence due to the nature of his offenses. He is currently incarcerated in a high-security federal facility. But what makes Sharper's story so haunting is not just the number of victims or the gruesome details. It's what it says about how predators operate in plain sight. Sharper was successful, beloved, and admired. He didn't need to lure his victims through force. He used trust, fame, charm. He built a life of privilege, and then exploited every part of it to hurt people who had no reason to fear him. For his victims, the scars remain. Some have spoken out, while others have chosen silence, a silence Sharper once forced upon them. The trauma doesn't go away with a verdict. It lingers in the shadows, in the fear, in the shattered image of someone they thought was safe. In the years since his conviction, Sharper's name has become radioactive. The NFL scrubbed its mentions. The Hall of Fame, which he might have once been eligible for, will never consider him. And when his story is told now, it's not about interceptions or Super Bowls. It's about destruction. About how far someone can fall, and how many people they can take with them. His case also forced a broader conversation about how sports institutions protect their stars, and how power can silence victims until it's too late. For years, there were whispers, quiet settlements, questions never asked. And as with many high-profile predators, the system protected him until the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Darren Sharper will one day walk free again. But his legacy will never recover. He is not a forgotten athlete. He is a remembered threat. A reminder that darkness often wears a mask, and sometimes that mask looks like success. He once stood under the stadium lights, arms raised in victory. Now, he sits behind steel bars, surrounded by silence. And for the women whose lives he shattered, that silence speaks louder than any cheer he ever earned. Number 5. Lawrence Phillips, a star destroyed by violence. He was once called the most talented running back in college football. A first-round NFL draft pick, a powerhouse out of Nebraska, Lawrence Phillips had the kind of athletic ability scouts dream about. He could run through defenders like they were paper, leap over would-be tacklers, and turn any play into a highlight reel. Coaches compared him to legends. Teams lined up to take a chance. But behind the speed, strength, and promise was something darker. A storm he never outran. A rage he never controlled. And in the end, Lawrence Phillips didn't just destroy his own career, he left behind a trail of fear, pain, and unanswered questions that ended in tragedy. Born in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1975, Phillips spent much of his early life in foster homes and group facilities in California. His childhood was marked by instability and trauma. But on the football field, he found something like control. At Baldwin Park High School, he became a standout athlete, and his talent eventually landed him a scholarship to the University of Nebraska, one of the most elite college football programs in the country. It didn't take long for Phillips to make headlines. He was powerful, explosive, and fearless. Under coach Tom Osborne, Nebraska was a dominant force, and Phillips was the centerpiece. He helped lead the Cornhuskers to a national championship in 1994 and was a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. But even as he racked up yards and accolades, the warning signs were flashing. Off the field, Phillips was angry, volatile, prone to violent outbursts. In 1995, during his junior season, he broke into the apartment of his ex-girlfriend, basketball player Kate McEwen, and dragged her down 3 flights of stairs by her hair. The assault was brutal, shocking, and public. He was immediately suspended by the team. But in a move that would haunt Nebraska for years, Coach Osborne reinstated him less than 2 months later. Why? Because they needed him to win another championship. And when they did, Phillips played in the national title game and helped Nebraska blow out the University of Florida 62-24. But the message was clear: talent came first. Accountability would wait. In 1996, despite his violent past, the St. Louis Rams selected Phillips with the 6th overall pick in the NFL draft. It was a risk, and they knew it. But Rams head coach Dick Vermeil famously said, "We can change him. We can help him." They couldn't. Phillips' time in the NFL was brief, chaotic, and disturbing. He lasted just 1 season in St. Louis, clashing with coaches, showing up late to practices, and displaying increasingly erratic behavior. He was cut after just 25 games. Over the next few years, he bounced between teams: the Miami Dolphins, the San Francisco 49ers, each stop shorter than the last, each filled with new problems. The 49ers saw his final snap in professional football. In 1999, during a game against the Arizona Cardinals, Phillips missed a crucial block that led to a sack and concussion for quarterback Steve Young, a hit that ended Young's career. Shortly after, Phillips was released for repeated disciplinary issues. By 2000, the NFL had given up on him. His career was over. But his violence wasn't. Over the next several years, Phillips racked up arrests and charges: assault with a deadly weapon, domestic violence, DUI, and child abuse. His relationships were short-lived and often ended with accusations of physical abuse. Police reports described incidents of choking, slapping, stalking. His rage followed him everywhere. Time and time again, he was jailed, released, arrested again. No team would touch him. No league would call. In 2005, the breaking point came. Phillips was sentenced to 10 years in prison for multiple counts of domestic violence and assault after he choked his then-girlfriend until she passed out, and later drove his car into a group of teenagers following a pickup football game. While behind bars, he assaulted a prison guard, which added an additional 25 years to his sentence. At this point, Phillips was a forgotten name in football. A tragic story. But in 2015, his name returned to headlines, this time for something far darker. On April 11, 2015, Phillips' cellmate at Kern Valley State Prison in California, 37-year-old Damian Soward, was found dead, strangled and beaten. Suspicion immediately fell on Phillips. He was charged with first-degree murder, and prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. Inside the prison walls, Phillips had allegedly grown more isolated, more unstable. According to officials, Soward's murder wasn't a fight, it was a calculated killing. But before the case could go to trial, the story took its final, tragic turn. On January 13, 2016, at 12:05 a.m., guards found Lawrence Phillips unresponsive in his cell. He had fashioned a noose from bedsheets and hanged himself. Despite being on suicide watch just months earlier, he was alone at night. No note was found. He was pronounced dead at age 40. His death sparked outrage and confusion. Some believed it was an act of guilt, a final escape from a lifetime of consequences. Others wondered whether it was suicide at all. But for most, the tragedy wasn't just how he died, it was how no one had stopped him from becoming who he became. Phillips was a man born into violence, shaped by a broken system, and fueled by anger he never learned to control. The institutions around him, schools, coaches, teams, enabled him, protected him, excused him. They believed that if he could run fast enough, nothing else mattered. But eventually, he couldn't outrun the person he was. In the end, Lawrence Phillips didn't just ruin his own life. He left behind scars on the lives of women, teammates, victims, and a game that failed to draw the line when it should have. His story is a brutal cautionary tale about the danger of letting talent blind us to truth, of letting potential excuse pain. He could have been one of the greats. Instead, he became one of the darkest chapters in football history. A star destroyed, not by injury, not by circumstance, but by violence. Violence that never left him. Violence he never put down. And when the silence finally came, it was too late for apologies, too late for redemption. Only tragedy remained. Number 6. Justin Crawford, A Fall into Darkness. Some names fade from the spotlight without much notice. Others return in ways the world cannot forget. Justin Crawford was never an NFL superstar. His time in professional football was brief, almost forgettable to the average fan. But the actions that followed his short-lived career would thrust his name into national headlines, not for glory, but for disgrace. What unfolded wasn't just a criminal case, It was a deeply disturbing breach of trust that left a permanent stain on his name, and a lasting scar in the broader conversation about character, responsibility, and the unseen dangers that can lie behind a jersey. Born in 1995 in Columbus, Georgia, Justin Crawford didn't come from wealth or legacy. His early years were marked by raw talent and relentless work ethic. In high school, he showed flashes of greatness as a running back, earning him a path to junior college football. He eventually transferred to West Virginia University, where he played 2 standout seasons and became the team's leading rusher. His performance earned praise for his agility, explosiveness, and field awareness. Though not a Heisman contender, Crawford looked like a solid prospect with the potential to grow into a reliable NFL role player. In 2018, after going undrafted, he signed as a free agent with the Atlanta Falcons. It was the kind of opportunity many young athletes dream of, an open door, a chance to prove himself among elite competition. But the window was short. Crawford was waived before the regular season even began. His NFL dreams ended just as they were beginning. For most, that would have been the end of the story. A young athlete who gave it a shot, fell short, and faded quietly into everyday life. But just months later, a horrifying event shattered any hopes of redemption. It didn't happen on the field, or in a locker room, or even in public view. It happened in the most personal, most private of settings, inside a home where trust was broken in the worst way imaginable. In October 2018, Crawford was arrested in his hometown following an incident involving a minor guest who had been staying in the home he shared with his wife. According to authorities, Crawford's actions constituted a serious breach of both legal and moral boundaries, and the case quickly garnered attention for its disturbing nature. During the investigation, Crawford admitted to what occurred. His own statements to police left no room for misunderstanding, and legal proceedings moved forward with heavy gravity. He was charged with multiple serious offenses involving unlawful contact with a person under the age of consent. The details of the case were deemed so troubling that Crawford was denied bond and placed in custody pending trial. What had started as a football career ended with a prison jumpsuit and a courtroom packed with disbelief. In 2019, Crawford pleaded guilty as part of a legal agreement that avoided a trial, likely sparing further trauma for the victim and her family. The court handed down a 12-year prison sentence, followed by 8 years of probation, along with mandatory registration as a lifelong offender in the state's legal database. As of now, Crawford remains incarcerated, and early parole has been denied. The sports world reacted with silence. The NFL made no official comment, and the Falcons distanced themselves from the story, having released Crawford long before the arrest. But fans, commentators, and former teammates were stunned. How could someone who had seemingly worked so hard to reach the top, who stood so close to greatness, commit such an unforgivable act? There was no satisfying answer. Only questions, heartbreak, and outrage. What makes this case especially haunting is how quietly dangerous it was. Crawford wasn't a star drunk on fame. He wasn't battling public demons or caught in a media whirlwind. He was a fringe player, humble, hardworking, and beneath the radar. And yet, when the headlines broke, the fall felt just as loud and just as horrifying. For the victim and their family, the emotional toll is impossible to measure. Their privacy has been fiercely protected, and rightfully so. But no sentence, no amount of time served, can undo the trauma caused. Trust was shattered. Safety was taken away. And healing, if it comes, will take years, maybe a lifetime. In the aftermath, many were left asking, how did this happen? What drives someone with opportunity, talent, and support to make a decision that devastates so many lives? These are the uncomfortable questions that hover over this chapter, not just about Crawford, but about the systems that fail to detect darkness until it's too late. This story also highlights a crucial reality within professional sports. Not all danger comes from head injuries or locker room brawls. Sometimes, the most dangerous behavior is psychological, hidden behind charisma or silence. The image of an athlete is often carefully curated, strong, focused, disciplined. But behind closed doors, who are they? And what happens when no one is watching? Crawford's legacy, if it can be called that, is not one of yards gained or records broken. It's a cautionary tale. A grim reminder that even a brief brush with the NFL shield doesn't guarantee character, morality, or responsibility. It's not just about what someone does on the field. It's who they are when the stadium lights go out. His case, though not widely covered compared to other high-profile figures, still carries significant weight. Because it forces viewers, fans, and the league itself to confront an uncomfortable truth. Even at the edges of greatness, the most disturbing human failures can occur. They're not always loud. They're not always visible. But they leave behind damage that lasts far longer than a football season. Today, Crawford sits in a Georgia prison, his future written not by touchdowns, but by tragedy. He'll likely never see the inside of a stadium again. His name is gone from merchandise, websites, and fan memory. But for those who follow the case, the impact remains. This isn't a story of missed potential. It's a story of irreversible betrayal. And while justice may have been served in the eyes of the court, the deeper damage, the emotional and moral cost, can never be truly repaired. Some chapters end with redemption. Others with reflection. But this one ends with silence. A silence heavy with grief, anger, and the echoes of a career that could have been so much more, if only the man behind it had chosen a different path. Number 7. Jovan Belcher, a murder-suicide that rocked the league. December 1, 2012. It was a cold morning in Kansas City, and no one had any reason to expect tragedy. The Kansas City Chiefs were preparing for a home game, coaches and staff arriving at Arrowhead Stadium like they had hundreds of times before. But that day, before the players had even put on their jerseys, something unimaginable happened. A man they trusted, a teammate they had shared locker rooms and huddles with, pulled into the parking lot with a loaded gun. And moments later, Jovan Belcher, linebacker, father, and rising NFL star, would put the barrel to his head and pull the trigger in front of his head coach and general manager. The shock that followed was unlike anything the NFL had seen in years. But the tragedy didn't start there. It had begun just hours earlier, in a quiet home where something went terribly wrong. Born in 1987 in West Babylon, New York, Jovan Henry Allen Belcher grew up disciplined and determined. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't arrogant. At the University of Maine, he wasn't recruited as a high-profile athlete, but quickly became one of the most respected players in the program. He was known for his work ethic, intelligence, and hard-hitting presence on defense. Coaches described him as coachable, consistent, and mature beyond his years. Despite going undrafted in 2009, Belcher signed with the Kansas City Chiefs and defied the odds. He made the roster as an undrafted free agent and quickly climbed the depth chart. By his second season, he was a starting linebacker, reliable, tough, and a quiet leader on the field. He wasn't a superstar, but he was trusted. Solid. The kind of player every team needs. Off the field, Belcher appeared composed. He had a girlfriend, Cassandra Perkins, and together they had a baby girl just 3 months old. To the outside world, he seemed like a man building a life, one step at a time. But behind closed doors, something darker was brewing. Reports would later reveal a growing tension between Belcher and Perkins. Arguments had become frequent. Friends and family spoke of jealousy, emotional strain, and resentment. The responsibilities of fatherhood, the pressure of professional sports, and Belcher's own mental health were colliding in dangerous ways. In the early hours of December 1, 2012, after a night of drinking and emotional turmoil, things exploded. At approximately 7:50 a.m., Belcher and Perkins began arguing inside their home. According to police, it was loud, volatile, and desperate. At some point, in front of his own mother, who was staying with the couple, Belcher shot Cassandra Perkins multiple times, killing her in cold blood as their infant daughter cried nearby. His mother fled the house and called 911, begging for help. But it was already too late. Belcher then climbed into his black Bentley and drove, not to escape, but to finish something. He headed straight to Arrowhead Stadium, where he was met by Chiefs general manager Scott Poley, head coach Romeo Crennel, and linebackers coach Gary Gibbs. What happened next has been described as both heartbreaking and surreal. Belcher exited his vehicle calmly, gun in hand. He thanked his coaches. He expressed regret. According to police transcripts and eyewitness accounts, he said, "I'm sorry, guys. You've been good to me. I just want to thank you for everything." Then, as police officers began to arrive and surround the area, Belcher walked a few feet away, knelt down, and shot himself in the head. He was 25 years old. The NFL world was paralyzed. The Kansas City Chiefs canceled all press conferences, and for a time, it was unclear whether their scheduled game the next day would even be played. Players were devastated. Coaches were traumatized. The team ultimately chose to play, perhaps as a way to heal, perhaps because football was all they had to lean on. But the deeper questions couldn't be ignored. Why did this happen? What pushed a seemingly normal, disciplined young man to murder the mother of his child, and then take his own life in front of his mentors? In the days and weeks that followed, the narrative shifted toward mental health, CTE, and the hidden emotional toll of football. Belcher had suffered multiple documented concussions during his career. Teammates and family mentioned behavioral changes, irritability, paranoia, mood swings. His drinking had increased. His sense of stability had started to crumble. In 2014, researchers at Boston University examined Belcher's brain and confirmed what many had feared. He was suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. The symptoms of CTE can include depression, aggression, memory loss, and suicidal thoughts. It had already been linked to several former NFL players who died by suicide or committed acts of violence. And now, Jovan Belcher was part of that haunting pattern. The revelation devastated those who knew him. Had his brain betrayed him? Had football, the very sport that lifted him out of obscurity, planted a time bomb in his mind? Cassandra Perkins was just 22 years old when she was killed. Her family, shattered, would go on to raise her daughter without either parent. Their loss was not just personal, it was a national heartbreak. A woman full of life, silenced by the man she once loved. A mother gone in an instant. A daughter orphaned before she could even speak. Jovan Belcher's story is not one of fame gone wrong or a criminal double life. It's the story of internal collapse, a man who, on the outside, held it together, but inside was unraveling. A life that spiraled, quietly and tragically, until it ended in blood and shock. It forced the NFL to once again confront its uncomfortable relationship with brain injuries, with pressure, with silence around mental health. In the years since, changes have been made. Better concussion protocols. Greater awareness. Conversations about therapy, about CTE, about emotional support. But the stain of what happened that morning remains. Because no matter how much science explains, no matter how many changes are made, 2 lives are still gone. And a little girl will grow up only knowing her parents through news articles and memories passed down from others. Belcher's locker was never filled again. His name, once printed on jerseys and rosters, was slowly removed. But the echoes of his story still linger in stadium tunnels and locker rooms, reminders of what pressure, pain, and untreated trauma can lead to when no one is watching closely enough. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a wake-up call, one the league will never forget. Number 8. O.J. Simpson, the shadow that still haunts the NFL. Before the fall, he was a legend. A face that sold sneakers, lit up television screens, and carved out yards like few ever had. Orenthal James Simpson, better known as O.J., wasn't just an athlete. He was a phenomenon. A Heisman Trophy winner, a record-breaking running back, a Hollywood actor, a commentator, a man who transcended sports and became one of the most recognizable figures in America. But today, when people hear his name, they don't think of touchdowns or trophies. They think of blood, of a white Bronco, of a courtroom, of gloves that didn't fit. O.J. Simpson became something more than infamous. He became a symbol of power, of race, of justice, and of how far a hero could fall. Simpson's football career began with brilliance. Born in 1947 and raised in the streets of San Francisco, he rose through hardship with explosive athletic talent. At the University of Southern California, he won the Heisman Trophy in 1968, setting records and electrifying college football. The Buffalo Bills selected him first overall in the 1969 NFL Draft. And once in the league, Simpson didn't just play, he redefined the position. He was the first NFL player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, and he did it in just 14 games. Nicknamed the Juice, Simpson's playing style combined power, grace, and pure speed. He made it look effortless. In the 1970s, he was the face of the NFL. But his ambitions went far beyond the gridiron. As his football career wound down, Simpson moved seamlessly into entertainment. He appeared in commercials, TV shows, and films. From The Towering Inferno to the slapstick Naked Gun series, he had a natural presence on screen. America loved him. He was charming, clean-cut, successful. He broke racial barriers in advertising and media. For many, O.J. Simpson was proof that America had changed, that a black man could rise to the top and be embraced across all audiences. But on the night of June 12, 1994, that image shattered forever. Nicole Brown Simpson, O.J.'s ex-wife, and her friend Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside her Brentwood home in Los Angeles. Nicole had been stabbed multiple times, nearly decapitated. Goldman was left slashed and bleeding nearby. The crime scene was horrific. The motive unclear. But suspicion quickly turned to one man, O.J. Simpson. What followed was unlike anything the country had seen. A slow-speed car chase watched by over 95 million people. A media frenzy that never stopped. A trial that would become known as the trial of the century. Prosecutors laid out what they believed to be overwhelming evidence. Blood from the crime scene matched O.J.'s. A bloody glove found on his property. His history of domestic violence. A timeline that didn't quite add up. But Simpson's defense team, dubbed the Dream Team, launched a counterattack that blended doubt with performance. Led by Johnny Cochran, they claimed O.J. was the victim of a racist police conspiracy. That LAPD detective Mark Furman planted evidence that the system couldn't be trusted. And then came the moment that defined it all, the glove. When Simpson tried on the bloody glove in court and struggled to fit it over his hand, Cochran delivered the now famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." On October 3, 1995, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. The verdict divided the nation. To some, it was a devastating miscarriage of justice. To others, It was long overdue proof that a black man could beat a system stacked against him. But whatever your view, one truth remained: 2 people were dead, and no one was held criminally responsible. But the story didn't end there. In 1997, the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman sued Simpson in civil court. This time, the burden of proof was lower. And this time, the result was different. Simpson was found liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole and Ron and ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages. He never paid much of it. But the verdict stuck. It was a stain that even his charm couldn't wash away. O.J. Simpson became a pariah. Sponsors vanished. Acting roles disappeared. Friends distanced themselves. And yet, he remained in the public eye, giving interviews, playing golf, appearing in tabloids. He couldn't stay out of the spotlight. And eventually, the spotlight caught up with him again. In 2007, Simpson, then living in Las Vegas, was involved in an incident that would finally land him behind bars. Along with a group of men, he stormed a hotel room at gunpoint to retrieve sports memorabilia he claimed had been stolen from him. The act was clumsy, desperate, and criminal. In 2008, Simpson was convicted on multiple felony charges including armed robbery and kidnapping. He was sentenced to 33 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 9. In 2017, after serving 9 years, Simpson was released. He has remained free since, occasionally surfacing on social media or at public events. But the shadow never left. Because even though he didn't serve life in prison, O.J. Simpson carries a life sentence in the court of public opinion. His story isn't just about crime, it's about America. About race, celebrity, and justice. About how fame can shield, distort, and ultimately destroy. He was once the most admired athlete in the country. Now, he's one of the most controversial figures in modern history. The NFL has long distanced itself from O.J. Simpson. His name is rarely spoken in official circles. He remains in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, as there are no mechanisms to remove inductees based on criminal allegations or civil judgments. But his legacy is complicated beyond repair. Simpson's fall didn't just scar his image, it shook the culture. It became the subject of books, documentaries, and television series. His trial changed how Americans view the legal system. His story still provokes arguments, emotions, and disbelief. And maybe that's why he belongs in this chapter. Not because he's currently behind bars, but because his actions left a mark far deeper than any prison sentence could. O.J. Simpson is not just a former NFL star. He is a symbol of how fame, violence, and justice collided, and left the nation still trying to make sense of it.